I was still wearing the hospital gown when the nurse came in clutching a clipboard and trying to look casual. "Your son stopped by this morning," she said, adjusting the IV drip. "Said something about finalizing paperwork for the house." I blinked, still groggy from the anesthesia. "The what?" "The house," she repeated. "Said you'd signed everything over before the procedure." She moved on like she hadn't just fractured something inside me. A tightness spread across my chest, not surgical, but familiar. Betrayal always lands quietly, like a bruise that doesn't bloom until later. I waited until they wheeled me out that evening. No extra day for rest. No follow-up dinner tray. I called a car paid in cash and asked the driver to take me straight home. I wanted to see with my own eyes what they'd done. When we turned onto Aspen Hill Road, my heart sank. My rose bushes were gone. Instead, 2 folding chairs sat on the lawn. Heather's chairs. White plastic ones she liked to decorate with seasonal bows. The wreath on the door was no longer mine. It was a burlap monstrosity with a wooden W hanging off it. Their last name, not mine. I stepped out of the car, the pavement still warm beneath my slippers. No one answered the bell. I let myself in with the spare key from under the ceramic frog because, of course, they hadn't thought to change that yet. The living room had been rearranged. My recliner was gone. The sofa I bought after my promotion at the bank was covered with a blanket I didn't recognize. Family portraits mine were missing. In their place, maternity photos. Nathan's hand on Heather's stomach. Her laughing up at him like she'd won something. I walked down the hall and opened the door to my bedroom. It wasn't mine anymore. The bed was gone. The walls were painted pale blue. A rocking chair sat in the corner next to a half-assembled crib. There was a white dresser with gold knobs and framed quotes about blessings and baby toes. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame to steady myself. Mom Heather's voice came from the kitchen. She appeared seconds later, holding an iced coffee. Tight, ponytailed gym clothes, no makeup, no shame. "Oh, you're back early," she said. "We thought they were keeping you overnight." I didn't move. "Where's my bed?" she sipped. "We're setting up the nursery. You'll stay in the den for now. Or with a friend if that's easier." I stared at her, willing her to flinch. She didn't. We moved forward with the paperwork by the way she said, flipping her ponytail over her shoulder. "The deed's in our name now." It just made more sense. I nodded once. "And Nathan. He signed everything this morning." She smiled over the rim of her plastic cup. "You were still under, so we figured less stress for you." I turned and walked out. The hallway felt narrower than before. I stepped into the kitchen hoping to find a glass of water or something, anything to anchor me. Instead, I saw the envelopes stacked on the counter. Mortgage insurance utilities, a letter from the county clerk, all addressed to Nathan and Heather Whitmore. I picked one up. It was a property tax notice. I didn't see my name anywhere. I left the house without saying another word. Walked 3 blocks to the gas station. Sat at the back table with a vending machine coffee still in my gown and called Uncle Lewis. When he picked up, I didn't bother explaining everything. "I need a lawyer," I said. By the time I got back to my rented apartment the next morning, my bedroom was still empty. I sat on the floor, pulled out a notepad, and began listing what was mine, what they'd taken, and what they still didn't know I had. Because I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Heather smiled like she was welcoming me to a brunch I hadn't RSVP'd for. She stood in the kitchen doorway holding that same iced coffee, her nails glossy and nude-toned, her other hand resting casually on her hip like she owned the place. And now, legally, she did. Or at least she thought she did. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said, voice sweetened with artificial concern. "But we really thought it was best." I didn't sit. I didn't lean against the counter. I didn't even drop my bag. I just stared at her. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because anything I said would have broken something I couldn't take back yet. She took my silence as permission. We're turning your room into the nursery. It has the best light in the morning and it's right across from the bathroom. Plus, another sip. Another smile. It just makes sense for the baby. I glanced around the kitchen. My spice rack was gone. My mug tree gone. In its place were fresh-cut hydrangeas in a white vase labeled farmhouse. Her style, not mine. She'd replaced even the coffee. I spotted a tub of imported espresso grounds on the counter. The cheap brand I liked wasn't good enough for her French press. I finally spoke. "Where's Nathan?" "He's at Home Depot, getting stuff for the crib." Her eyes flicked down to my clothes jeans and a sweater that hung a little too loose after the hospital stay. "You look tired. Do you want to lie down in the den?" I asked. "Well, yes," she said, her voice a bit smaller now. "Just for now. Until we get the guest room set up." "The guest room?" "In my house." I nodded once. I was too tired to fight, too clear-headed to yell. If they thought they'd won because I didn't slam doors and cry, they didn't know me at all. "I won't be staying long," I said, brushing past her and opening the fridge. A single container of Greek yogurt, almond milk, bottled water, no leftovers, no hint of how I used to live here. She'd scrubbed me out like mildew. I grabbed the water and turned toward the back hallway. Her voice followed me. "I hope we can move past this. I mean, we're family." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked down the hall, opened the door to the den, and stared at the futon they'd unfolded. No sheets, just a scratchy blanket folded at the end. The side table still held the same lamp, though. The one I'd bought when Nathan was in high school. He'd broken the original one playing indoor basketball. I'd driven to a store across town just to replace it before company came over. Funny, the things we remember. I sat down, slowly feeling the tightness in my ribs from the surgical tape. It wasn't just my body that needed healing. From the front of the house, I heard Heather laughing, probably on the phone, maybe with her mother. I tried to imagine how she was explaining it. "We're helping her downsize. It's better this way." I reached for the old notepad I'd stuffed in my bag and wrote one word at the top: inventory. Then I drew a line and wrote trust, deed, life insurance, spare key, title documents. They'd taken what was easy to grab, but they didn't know what still had my name on it, and they certainly didn't know what was buried in the attic. The records clerk was young, probably not long out of college, and spoke with the kind of efficiency that only came from memorizing a script. "Do you have the parcel number or just the address?" I gave her the address. My address. She typed it in, clicked twice, then pulled a manila folder from a drawer behind her. She slid it across the counter like it was nothing more than a water bill. "These are the most recent filings." I opened the folder and pulled out the top sheet. Transfer of title. Buyers Nathan Whitmore and Heather Whitmore. Previous owner Marla Grayson. There it was, my name. In black ink, neatly printed. Below it, a signature that was supposed to be mine. I leaned in closer, tracing each letter with my eyes. At first glance, it looked right. My handwriting had always been steady, but this one, it missed something. The curve of the M was too tight, too flat. I always looped the last downstroke, a habit I picked up from my mother's cursive when she wrote checks. This signature ended in a sharp drop. It wasn't mine. It was close, but it wasn't me. "May I have a copy of this?" I asked. The clerk nodded, took the form, and ran it through a scanner. As she handed the copy back, she smiled politely. "Congratulations on the transfer." I didn't respond. Outside, the wind cut colder than I expected. I tucked the copy into my coat pocket and stood on the sidewalk a moment too long, staring down at the concrete. My shoes didn't match. I hadn't even noticed when I left the house. That's how out of place I was. Back at my apartment, I laid the deed out on the kitchen table and pulled an old folder from the fireproof lockbox I'd kept since Nathan was in middle school. Inside, I found the original title, my real one, and 3 other documents with my verified signature on them. I laid them side by side. The will, the insurance policy, the bank form, all mine, and then the new deed. Close, but not me. I took a pen and slowly copied my signature on a blank piece of paper. Then I circled the curve on the M. The forgery cut it short, clean. Mine didn't. I always finished it with a lift a flick. It was muscle memory. Unteachable. Unstealable. I scanned all of it and emailed it to Lewis's lawyer, attaching a note. Let me know what happens next. He called that evening. It's forgery, he said flatly. And if you didn't authorize the transfer, it's fraud. You have a case. I exhaled, but it didn't feel like relief. Just another kind of weight. He continued. You want to go criminal or civil? I looked at the kitchen sink. A single dirty spoon sat there from the coffee I made that morning. Everything else was spotless. I want them to feel it, I said. Not just lose the house. I want them to understand what they did. There was a pause. Then we start quiet. Build the record. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That night I climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling fan. I'd bought that fan when Nathan graduated college. We'd celebrated right here. Champagne in plastic cups. He said he wanted to make me proud. Now he had Heather, a house she didn't earn, and my name on a piece of paper I never touched. I reached over, turned off the lamp, and whispered to the dark, You want the house. Let's see what it costs you. The house didn't come easy. I worked 3 jobs the year Nathan turned 10. I cleaned office buildings before sunrise, answered phones at the dental clinic from 9 to 5, and waitressed weekend nights at the diner just off Highway 8. My body ached constantly back then. Feet, blistered hands, raw stomach, hollow more often than full. But the dream of that house kept me moving. We'd pass it sometimes on our walks to the library. A modest 2-bedroom with cedar trim big bay windows and a sloping lawn that turned gold in the fall. I told Nathan once in a moment of foolish vulnerability, that's where we'll live someday. He was eating a peanut butter sandwich and barely nodded. Will it have a dishwasher? He asked. If we're lucky, I said. I skipped every vacation, canceled cable, shared a car with a neighbor for 2 years. There were months I paid the mortgage late so I could afford braces for Nathan's crooked front teeth. I remember standing in line at the pharmacy counting coins for his inhaler, pretending I'd just forgotten my wallet to save face. And when his school needed volunteers, I showed up exhausted, but smiling, pretending I had more energy than I did because he deserved to see me show up. Always. Even when I missed birthdays or parent nights, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I was choosing survival over celebration, paying bills instead of baking cupcakes. That's the kind of mother I was. Practical, quiet, stubborn, and the house. That was the one gift I gave myself. After years of sleeping on sofas of folding laundry in strangers' basements, I signed the mortgage with trembling hands and finally unpacked my own dishes in a kitchen I owned. I painted every room myself, tiled the bathroom, planted the rose bushes with Nathan one summer when he was 15 and too old to care but too young to say no. I thought he understood. I thought if I gave him stability, he'd grow up solid, grateful, decent. But children remember comfort more than cost. He grew up thinking safety was free. Now I was the one sleeping on a stranger's futon again, and he was drinking coffee in my kitchen, handing out keys like they came in a cereal box. I stared at the legal documents spread across my table, the ones I'd highlighted and annotated with red ink. Interest rates, property values, forgery statutes. The lawyer had said I could go for restitution or for charges. Maybe both. I didn't want revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted him to say, "You didn't deserve this." Instead, I got silence. Even as I gathered the receipts and the records, I kept thinking about the Christmas he asked for that remote-controlled car, the one I couldn't afford. He never mentioned it again, never blamed me, but he remembered. I saw it in his face when Heather surprised him with 1 year later wrapped in gold paper. Maybe he thought love looked like that. Gifts, grand gestures, legal transfers. I leaned back, rubbed my temples, and looked at the clock. Almost midnight. I opened a drawer, pulled out an old photo. Nathan and I standing in front of the house, his high school diploma in one hand, my arm around his shoulder. He used to smile like he meant it. I set the photo down and picked up the deed again. Tomorrow, I'd take it to the courthouse. Not to undo it, not yet, but to mark the line where things started to unravel. Heather didn't even look up from her phone when I walked into the kitchen. "You're up early," she said, tapping her screen. Feeling better, I sat at the table and placed a folder beside my coffee. It was a copy of the deed, the one with the forged signature, and 3 documents showing my real one. "We need to talk," I said. Heather glanced at the folder like it was junk mail. "Everything okay?" I opened it slowly, showing her the signature page. "This isn't mine." She finally looked up. "What do you mean? I mean someone forged my name," I said. "I didn't sign this." She shrugged, too casual. "Memory slips happen. You were on medication before the surgery. Maybe you just don't remember." I stared at her. "That's the best you can do." She folded her arms. "Look, I'm not trying to argue with you. But Nathan said you were acting a little confused. I mean the stress, the hospital stay. It happens at your age." "My age." I leaned back. "And what exactly did Nathan say I was confused about?" She hesitated. "Just little things. You were asking about bills that were already paid. You repeated yourself a few times. That's called recovering from anesthesia." Heather smiled gently, like she was humoring a child. "Of course, but we just assumed, no." "You assumed," I said sharply. At that moment, Nathan walked in, holding a bag of groceries and a guilty expression. He paused when he saw the open folder on the table. His eyes darted to Heather, then back to me. "I asked her about the deed," I said. "She thinks maybe I imagined the forgery." He set the bag down carefully, like sudden movement might break something between us. "Mom, did you forge my signature?" I asked. He looked at the wall, at the floor, anywhere but at me. "It was Heather's idea," he said quietly. "She said we should move quickly while you were in recovery. Said it would be easier that way." Heather threw up her hands. "We're building a family, Nathan. I told you we should have explained it to her right away." "I didn't sign anything," I said, voice low. "You did this without my knowledge. And you lied about it." Nathan pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "We didn't think you'd say yes. And we needed the security. The baby I worked my whole life for. That house," I interrupted. "And you gave it away like it was a wedding gift." "It's still our family," Heather said, voice rising now. "We're not strangers. You'll still live here. You'll be part of the baby's life. But come on, Mom. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Then she said it casually, like brushing lint off a sleeve. "You're just old, Mom. Things slip. You probably thought you didn't sign it, but maybe you did." Something snapped in me. Not loud, not visible, but final. I stood up, slow and steady. "Do not confuse age with weakness. I may be tired, but I'm not blind." Neither of them responded. I walked to the front door, opened it, and looked out at the lawn where my rose bushes used to be. Gone. Dug up without a word. "Where are the roses?" I asked. Heather's voice came from behind me. The roots were crowding the foundation. We needed the space. I stepped outside. The air was dry cold, the kind that clears your head. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say goodbye. I just left. Because if they thought memory was the problem, then they had no idea what I remembered. Uncle Lewis didn't waste time with sympathy. He called me back an hour after I left a shaky voicemail, his voice steady as ever. "Tell me everything," he said. I sat in my parked car outside the library, hands trembling over the wheel. I told him about the deed, the forged signature, the kitchen confrontation, and the insult that still echoed in my ears, just old. He didn't interrupt. Not once. Just listened. When I finished, there was silence. Then he exhaled sharply. She always had a clever mouth, that Heather, he said. But Nathan? I didn't think he'd sink this low. He barely looked at me, Louis. He let her speak for both of them, like I was some tenant overstaying my welcome. Have you shown the signature to anyone? Yes. I sent copies to your lawyer friend Lindell. Good. Then don't wait. Call this guy instead. I heard him shuffling through something on his end. Name's Robert Halpern. Estate fraud and title disputes. He's got bite. Tell him I sent you. Call him today. I don't know if I want to take it that far. Louis didn't hesitate. Marla, they stole your home. Not borrowed. Not miscommunicated. Stole. If you let this slide, they'll treat it like permission. That was the moment something shifted. I stopped shaking. Stopped second-guessing. I didn't need to convince them anymore. I needed to act. I dialed the number Louis gave me before I even left the parking lot. A woman named Jolene answered, asked a few questions, and transferred me directly. Halpern, came the voice. Sharp, clipped. East Coast accent despite being based in Boulder. I was referred by Louis Grayson, I said. That got his attention. You're Marla. The one with the forged deed? Yes. You still have the original documents? Yes. Good. Then we start now. Over the next 20 minutes, he laid it out cleanly. This wasn't a civil misunderstanding. It was criminal. Title fraud, identity theft, misuse of a power of attorney if they'd faked anything else. You have two choices, he said. We go straight to the DA and press charges, or we hit them with a formal notice of dispute and begin building a claim. Civil route takes longer, but it keeps you in control. I thought about Heather's smug little smile, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup in my kitchen. About Nathan avoiding my eyes like that would protect him. I want control, I said, for once. Then we start civil. I'll file a dispute notice with the county and a cease and desist to stop any financial actions using the house, and then we gather, he said. Everything you've got. Every bank record. Every text. Anything that proves this was not a mutual agreement. We let the law do what family clearly failed to. It wasn't anger I felt when I hung up the phone. It was clarity. I drove home my home with a new sense of stillness. Not peace. Not yet. But something close. That night I went into the attic. I hadn't been up there in years. Dust coated every box, but I knew what I was looking for. The shoebox with the yellow ribbon. Inside copies of my original mortgage. The amendment to Will's trust. And something else, a single-page letter from our old financial planner confirming sole ownership of the property under my name. I held it in both hands like it was made of glass. They didn't know I kept this. They thought I had nothing. The next time I met with Robert Halpern, I brought everything. Receipts, statements, email printouts, even a shoebox of labeled envelopes I hadn't touched since Will passed. We sat in his corner office above a strip mall, the kind of place people might overlook if they didn't know better. But the man knew his way around a fight, and that's exactly what I needed. He spread the documents across his desk, methodical and silent. Occasionally, he'd tap his pen on the edge of a page, nod once, and keep going. You kept detailed records, he finally said. Half impressed. I had to, I replied. When you grow up poor, you learn not to throw anything away. He picked up a credit card statement. This account's in your name. Yes. Always has been. He flipped through pages quickly, stopping at a highlighted section. Who charges $840 at a baby boutique called Little Lux? Not me. He jotted something down. And this one. He held up another sheet. Grubhub. Delivered to your old address. Repeatedly. Totaling $700 over 2 months. Also, not me. The deeper he went, the worse it got. Utility bills in my name. House repairs charged to my card. A new washer and dryer set installed the week after my surgery, $600 on my Home Depot line of credit. They're spending like it's a gift basket, he muttered. No, I corrected. Like it's disposable. He set down the stack and folded his hands. Marla, this isn't just theft. It's abuse. Financial exploitation of an elder, if we want to get specific. And if any of these accounts default, your credit takes the hit. I nodded slowly, the weight of it all pressing into my ribs. They didn't even ask. Just assumed I wouldn't check. Or assumed you'd be too scared to push back. They were almost right, I admitted. But not anymore, he said. We've got enough for a full complaint plus restitution claims. I'll need to pull banking records directly, see what else they've linked to you. If we're lucky, they've used your name on applications. That's where things start to crack. He stood and walked over to a locked cabinet. When he returned, he handed me a manila envelope. What's this? Your affidavit. I've drafted a sworn statement. We'll file it with the county clerk next week. After that, they'll be notified. Officially. And then we see what kind of people they really are when the paperwork hits their doorstep. I drove home, gripping the envelope like it held my spine together. I didn't go straight to the apartment. I parked outside the house again. My house. The porch light was on. The windows glowed from inside. I could hear faint laughter behind the walls. For a moment, it almost looked like a life I used to know. Then the front door opened. Heather stepped out in her robe, cell phone in hand, barefoot on my welcome mat. She didn't see me, but I watched as she leaned against the pillar and laughed into the phone. She sounded relaxed, at ease, like everything belonged to her. I didn't get out of the car. I just watched her a moment longer, then drove away. The next morning, I was back at the courthouse with Robert. He submitted the affidavit stamped and filed. It was official. They wanted a house. Now they had a case. The attic smelled like dust and dry insulation. It had always been a place I avoided unless absolutely necessary. Too hot in the summer, too cold in the winter, and filled with the kind of memories that gathered weight over time. But I remembered labeling the box wrong on purpose. Years ago, after Will passed, I'd taken all the most important documents, deeds, amendments, trusts, and buried them under layers of Christmas decorations and childhood art projects. I wrote old tax returns, 1994-2000 on the front in thick marker. No one looks twice at that. The lid stuck at first, but I pried it off gently and pulled back the top layer. There they were. The original deed embossed seal still crisp. The trust amendment from Will's lawyer clearly stating the house belonged solely to me upon his death. My name alone. Not ours. Not his and mine. Just mine. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, the edges of the box, digging into my thigh, and read every word again. I didn't need to. I remembered it all. But seeing it now in my hands, with the dust of betrayal still settling downstairs, that changed something. They never had a legal leg to stand on. Heather had smiled like a queen on her porch. Nathan had gone silent, waiting for me to fade quietly. But the truth was in my hands now, black and white, signed and witnessed. Heather's name wasn't mentioned once. Not in the trust, not in the deed, not in anything. I set the papers aside and dug deeper, pulling out one more envelope. A letter from Will's lawyer, dated 2 months before he passed, confirming the transfer of the property to my name alone. He had done it to protect me. And now, Nathan had undone it in a matter of weeks for a woman who threw out my rose bushes like they were weeds. I packed everything into a clean folder and slipped it into my satchel. The air in the attic felt different now. Still dusty, but somehow sharper, like the truth had been waiting all this time to be remembered. Back downstairs, I made a cup of coffee, my own brand, the one Heather tossed in the pantry for guests. The bitterness felt right. I didn't call Robert right away. Instead, I took a walk. 3 blocks down and one over was the park where Nathan used to play t-ball. I sat on the same bench I used to wait on, thermos in hand, watching him strike out and run the wrong direction. He was 5 then. He cried when they made him sit out. I gave him orange slices and told him he'd get better. He did. He always wanted praise, even when he didn't earn it. Back home, I made copies of the deed and trust and slid them into another envelope marked private, legal. Then I mailed it to Robert. No text, no email, just paper and postage. I also made a second copy. That one I slipped into a binder. I tucked it behind the books in the linen closet 3rd shelf, just in case. By the time the envelope reached Robert's office, he called me with something new in his voice. Not caution, not warning. This is bulletproof, he said. They won't just lose the house. They'll owe you interest damages and possibly face charges for what they've already done. I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the same spot on my kitchen wall where the family portrait used to hang. Then I said quietly, "Good. Let them wonder what's coming." Heather cornered me in the kitchen one morning while I poured my coffee, my brand, the one she pretended not to like. She had that careful voice, unsweetened but sharp around the edges. "I know this might feel sudden, but we've decided to go ahead with a backyard ceremony," she said, pulling out her phone. "Something simple, intimate, just a few close friends and family. Nothing flashy." I didn't look up. I stirred in a splash of milk and took a sip. "When end of next month," she said. "We already ordered invitations." I nodded once, as if she'd told me the weather. She smiled, wider, emboldened. "We'd love to use the yard, of course. You know your roses used to be beautiful out there. We're thinking string lights, maybe a big tent if it rains. Nathan's cousin is handling the catering." My hand tightened around the mug. The roses. She had the nerve to mention the roses she ripped out. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. Instead, I turned and faced her. "You'll need to have it cleared by the permit office if you're putting up tents." Her eyes flicked just briefly before settling back into her polished grin. "Of course. We'll handle all that. I knew you'd be supportive." Supportive. That was the word she used when she forged a signature and stole a home. I nodded again. Of course. She left the kitchen humming. Something bubbly and tuneless. It stayed in the air long after she was gone. Later that day, I called Robert. "They're planning a wedding," I said. "In my backyard." He didn't respond at first. "Then, do you want to stop it?" "No," I said. "I want them to build it up, schedule it. Invite everyone. Make it as public as possible." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." There was silence, then a chuckle low in his throat. "Understood. I'll hold the next step until the week before. If we time this right, we file the motion, freeze the property, and deliver notice all on the same day. Perfect." We hung up. I spent the next few weeks playing house guest in my own home, watching Heather flutter around with Pinterest boards and swatches. She asked me if I'd mind moving some boxes from the back room to make space for the dress fittings. I helped. Silently. Nathan barely spoke to me. He was always on a call, always conveniently slipping out when I entered a room. At dinner, he stared at his plate like the food would answer the questions I never asked out loud. One night I heard them whispering in the hallway. "She's being weirdly calm about it," Heather said. I expected more of a fight. Nathan said nothing. "She's probably grateful," Heather continued. "I mean, we're keeping her involved. She still gets to live here. It's not like we threw her out." "No," he said. "It's not." And then he added, almost too quiet to hear, "Yet." I stood behind the closed bedroom door, hand frozen on the light switch heart, like iron in my chest. The next morning, I helped Heather measure the backyard. She wanted a dance floor. I offered to sketch out spacing for her. She called me thoughtful. I smiled and told her I'd be even more helpful next week. The sign went up on a Thursday morning. White post, red letters, for sale, as is. Below that, the agent's name, number, and a small placard that read, "Showings begin today." Heather saw it from the kitchen window as she arranged flowers for the reception centerpieces. She didn't scream at first. She blinked, leaned closer, wiped the glass like the words might change. Then she screamed. "Nathan." I was sipping coffee at the table. Same spot, same mug. He came rushing in from the den phone, still in hand, face already pale. "What's going on?" She pointed wildly. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is." He stared out the window for a long second, then turned slowly toward me. "Mom?" He said, careful now, like I was a glass bottle already tipping. "Yes." "What is that?" I stood up, walked to the sink, rinsed my mug. "That's a sale notice." "You can't sell this house," Heather snapped. "The wedding is in 10 days. The guest list is locked." The deposit, I dried my hands and turned. "Heather, I never agreed to host a wedding." "You did." "We own this house," she spat. "Desperate now? You signed it over. You don't get to just change your mind." Nathan finally spoke quieter. "Did you?" "No," I said. "I didn't." He looked away. I walked to the hutch by the wall, opened the drawer, and took out the certified envelope Robert had mailed me that morning. I laid it on the table in front of them. "This is a legal notice. I've filed suit. Fraud, forgery, financial abuse. The deed is under formal dispute. All transactions involving this house are frozen until further ruling. You can explain that to the caterer." Heather's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You're bluffing." Nathan didn't even lift his head. Behind them, the doorbell rang. I moved to answer. It was a young couple in jeans and business casual. The woman smiled brightly. "Hi, we saw the listing go up. Is this a good time for a walkthrough?" I smiled back. "It's perfect." Heather's voice cracked behind me. "You're not serious. You can't do this. We're getting married here. You'll find the disclosures in the kitchen," I told the couple, holding the door wide. "Feel free to take your time." Nathan mumbled something and walked out of the room. He didn't stop to help her. The woman buyer complimented the kitchen layout. The man asked if the neighborhood was quiet. I answered like I wasn't standing in the middle of a personal war zone. Heather sat stiffly at the table, unmoving, watching strangers open her cupboards. I didn't rush them. They thanked me on the way out, said they'd be in touch with their realtor. I wished them a good day. Once the door closed, Heather turned to me with fire in her face. "You're trying to humiliate us." "No," I said. "I'm showing you what happens when people treat others like property." She stormed out of the room. Later, Nathan knocked softly on my bedroom door. I let him in, but only just. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "It didn't have to." He nodded once and left. That night, I stood at the window and watched 2 more couples walk up the path. Flashlights in hand, notes in folders, hope in their eyes. They weren't family. They weren't legacy. They were just people looking for a home. And that's exactly what I was about to reclaim. Mediation was scheduled in a beige office building behind a dentist's clinic. The kind of place where people sit in small chairs and pretend things aren't falling apart. Heather wore a navy blazer. Nathan looked like he hadn't slept. I walked in carrying only one thing, a single sheet of paper inside a manila folder. They had a lawyer. She was young, eager, and already flustered. Robert sat beside me, calm, his tie slightly loosened, like he didn't need to impress anyone. We didn't exchange pleasantries. The mediator gave the usual introduction, a practiced speech about cooperation, open discussion, the benefits of settling outside of court. Heather nodded like she was on a panel. Nathan kept his eyes down. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't offer emotion. I didn't tell stories. I didn't talk about hospital beds, empty rose gardens, or forgotten birthdays. I opened the folder and slid the paper across the table. "What's this?" their lawyer asked. "An invoice," Robert said. "Damages? Emotional distress. Identity theft. Unlawful occupancy. Use of credit and personal assets without consent. Plus interest." Heather laughed, once short and brittle. You're kidding. I looked at her. You forged my name on a deed, spent my money, and planned a wedding in the backyard of a stolen house. Why would I be kidding? She looked to Nathan for backup. He shifted in his seat. This doesn't include the house, he asked quietly. No, I said. I'm not asking for the house. Robert nodded. The property's already under dispute. That's a separate action. Today's about restitution. Heather folded her arms. So you don't even want it? Oh, I do, I said. But I want you to understand what it costs to take something that isn't yours. And now you'll pay for that understanding. Their lawyer flipped through the invoice, her pen tapping faster. This is significant, she said. Reasonable, Robert corrected. We've included every documented charge made under Marla's name, plus standard calculations for identity theft cases in this state. Nathan finally looked up. How long do we have? It started with the handbags. 3 days after mediation, Heather listed her first designer purse online, a limited edition satchel she used to parade around like a trophy. Now it was photographed on their kitchen counter with the caption, "Gently used, no scratches. Serious inquiries only." I didn't have to snoop. My neighbor's daughter sent me the listing. She used to babysit for them. Then came the shoes, the sunglasses, a coat Nathan gave her last Christmas. It sold for less than half what they paid. I kept quiet. Robert sent over the first payment request, $14,300 due within 10 business days. Just the beginning, itemized, signed, and acknowledged by both parties at mediation. A legal agreement, not a favor. The second payment wouldn't even be processed until the first cleared. That was the point. Nathan called me the next day. Can we talk? He asked. We are. He hesitated. Things are tight right now. Heather's trying to help, but we weren't expecting this kind of number. You weren't expecting consequences. Silence. I know it's a lot, he said. We're working on it. I didn't reply. I let the silence do what years of speaking hadn't. The next week, Robert forwarded a bank notice. Nathan had pulled from their joint savings account. Not a loan, a full withdrawal. The balance left behind wouldn't buy a tank of gas. Heather pawned her wedding ring on a Thursday. I didn't hear it from her, of course, but someone from the consignment shop mentioned it while I browsed for a new coffee table. She was crying, the woman told me. But not about the ring. About a car payment, I think. I nodded politely and paid in cash. Meanwhile, the house, still under legal freeze, was costing them more each day. Insurance premiums, maintenance, property taxes. None of which they could shift to me anymore. Robert had made sure of that. By the end of the month, they submitted their first partial payment, $8,000. No note, no apology. Just a bank transfer with a confirmation number. I printed it and filed it in a binder I now kept by the door. It was the same binder where I tracked bills when Nathan was little. Rent, groceries, co-pays, overdue utilities. I used to add them up at the end of each week and circle the red numbers with a highlighter just to remind myself what was real. Now I circled numbers for a different reason. They were still short by thousands. But I was patient. Heather stopped hosting her wedding planning meetings. The string lights she once bragged about stayed in their unopened box in the garage. Guests who had RSVP'd were now posting beach photos from someone else's ceremony. Every time they passed me in the hallway, they avoided my eyes. And still, I said nothing. I watched it unfold like a careful domino setup. Not because I pushed, but because they built it with no foundation. When the second payment was due, Heather called me. Her voice was different, tight, breathless. We're trying, Marla. You don't need the money. No, I said, but I earned it. She hung up. The next day, another $200 came through. Not enough, but movement. Robert sent them a polite reminder about the next phase interest. They hadn't read the fine print. I had. He knocked like someone who wasn't sure he should be there. It was early. I hadn't even made coffee yet. I opened the door to find Nathan standing in jeans and a sweatshirt that looked slept in. No car keys, no phone in hand, just him. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him pass. The rental was small, modest, but mine. No one had touched my books, rearranged my towels, or thrown out anything I'd planted. It wasn't home yet, but it was quiet, safe. He sat on the edge of the sofa like he didn't know how to take up space in a room that wasn't bought for him. I stayed standing. He rubbed his hands together. I didn't think she'd go that far. I watched him for a moment. "You didn't stop her." "I know." The words came out flat, but then his shoulders dropped. His voice cracked again. "I really thought it was temporary. That once the business took off." "What business I cut in? Heather doesn't work. She doesn't build anything. She spends. And you sign what she puts in front of you." He looked away. "You know how many hours I worked for that house?" I asked. 3 jobs at one point. Double shifts. I used to sleep in the break room at the hospital just to keep us fed. He nodded, but I kept going. "I didn't buy that place because it was fancy. I bought it because I wanted one thing that couldn't be taken from us. And you gave it away." "I thought she needed stability," he muttered. "She," I said. "What about your mother?" He didn't have an answer. Silence filled the space like a fog. I let it. After a while, he said, "Heather's selling her car. She should. I've applied for weekend shifts at the store." I nodded. "Good. I'm trying." I finally sat down across from him. "I know," I said, "but it doesn't undo what you allowed." He looked like he wanted to cry, but he didn't. "I miss you." "That's not enough." "I know," he said again. I stood. The moment was over. "You need to go." He didn't argue. Just got up, nodded, and left with the same soft knock he'd arrived with. I watched him walk down the steps, shoulders hunched like the weight finally registered. Back inside, I turned on the coffee pot. The quiet settled again, different. This time not empty, not angry. Just final. The envelope came on a Tuesday. Thick, cream-colored, and stamped confidential. I opened it thinking it was another update from Robert, or maybe a court filing. Instead, it was from the First National Credit Bureau, addressed to me by full legal name. Inside 3 pages of printed transactions all tied to my Social Security number. I sat down and read them twice. The first loan was dated 6 months ago. Then another 3 weeks later. Then 2 credit cards. A retail account. A line of credit. Each application used my name. Each address matched my former home. The phone number, the email, all slightly altered, just enough that I hadn't noticed. The digital fingerprints had been buried under Heather's online bills. The total $92.1426. I called the fraud department immediately. The man on the other end of the line was calm, professional, like he did this every day. Maybe he did. I answered his security questions, confirmed that the accounts were unauthorized, and followed his instructions. "You'll need to file a formal identity theft report," he said. "Once that's processed, we'll freeze the accounts and investigate the origin. There may also be criminal charges depending on what we find. Will the bank contact the person responsible?" He paused. "Ma'am, if there's a clear paper trail, yes. That's protocol." "Good," I said. "Then do it." That night, I pulled out the manila folder I'd been building with Robert, the one for damages, filings, screenshots. I added the bank letter to the stack and flagged it with a red tab. Heather hadn't just stolen the house. She'd leveraged my name for nearly $100,000 in loans, likely thinking no one would ever catch on that I'd stay confused, quiet, too tired to track every cent. But paper doesn't forget. The ledger doesn't lie. Robert called as I was making notes. "I just got the update," he said. "They've formally flagged the accounts as fraudulent. The bank is launching an internal investigation. You'll be contacted for a statement by the end of the week." "Let them call," I said. "I'm ready." He paused. "Marla, this takes it beyond civil. This could land her in prison. I'm aware. Are you ready for that too? I looked at the open folder at the tabs, the highlighters, the receipts. I wasn't, but I am now. The next morning, I walked into my old house, not because I had to, but because I could. Heather was standing in the kitchen with a cordless vacuum, still pretending to clean, like the world wasn't collapsing around her. She saw the envelope in my hand. What now? I placed it on the counter without a word. She opened it and scanned the top page. I saw her face tighten, just slightly, when the total appeared. I didn't think you'd find that, she muttered. No, I said. You didn't think I'd fight back. She folded the paper and set it aside, like it was a grocery list. I'll figure something out. No, I said again. You won't. That was the last thing I said to her. By the end of the week, I had submitted the affidavit, completed the bank interview, and mailed in notarized statements. The wheels were moving now. Not mine to push anymore, just mine to witness. I checked my account that Friday. Another partial payment had come in from Nathan's bank. It barely touched the balance, but I wasn't watching the payments anymore. I was watching the clock. The notice came by certified mail. It was thin, one page folded twice with a county seal pressed into the header. Auction date 31 days from issuance. Property 43, Wexler Lane. Current title disputed. Action foreclosure sale. Pending fraud determination. I read it once and placed it inside the binder with the rest. I didn't text Nathan. I didn't warn Heather. I didn't call their lawyer. Instead, I circled the date on a wall calendar in my rental. I marked it in red. Not because I was counting down to revenge, but because for the first time in months, I didn't have to chase anything. I just had to wait. Word spread quickly. My old neighbors started avoiding eye contact at the market. I saw Mrs. Wilkins at the pharmacy, and she froze halfway down the shampoo aisle, pretending to compare brands like she couldn't feel my stare. Her daughter used to mow my lawn for $10. That night I got a voicemail from Nathan. His voice sounded thin, frayed. Mom, we got the notice. I don't know what to do. I deleted the message. 2 days later, Heather came to my door. She didn't knock like someone remorseful. She knocked like someone offended. Like I had started a fire and she was just there to report the smoke. I need to talk, she said. Arms folded over a wrinkled blouse I'd seen her wear to brunches she no longer hosted. You always need something, I replied, holding the door halfway. You're going to lose everything too, she hissed. If that house sells, the court gets the money. You won't see a dime. I looked at her. Really looked and saw what she'd become. Tired. Edges cracked. Skin dulled by stress. The kind of wear that no serum could cover up. It was never about the money, I said. Then what is it, she snapped. I didn't answer. I closed the door instead. Robert called me later that day. They're trying to refinance, but the fraud freeze blocks every lender, he said. No bank wants to touch it until the investigation clears. How long? Too long. He paused, then added, They have no way out unless you drop the claim. I stared out the window. The sun was low, casting the rental walls in amber. I'm not dropping it. Didn't think you would. Nathan showed up the next morning with a duffel bag. His eyes were bloodshot. He didn't ask to come in, just sat on the front step with his head in his hands. I should have stopped her, he said. I knew it was wrong, but I thought it would fix itself, like everything else always did. I said nothing. He looked up at me. Will you stop it? The auction. Please. No, I said. He nodded once, a slow, defeated nod. Then he stood, shouldered the bag, and walked down the sidewalk like a man carrying more than fabric. I didn't watch him go. Inside, the calendar remained on the wall. The red circle, waiting. 23 days. The porch was small, but it fit 2 chairs and a side table, and that was all I needed. I moved in on a Wednesday, the sun just starting to cut through the heavy gray clouds that had hung over the past few weeks. A local moving crew brought the boxes. Not much, really, just what I'd taken from the old house, before the signatures turned to suspicion and the rooms began whispering things I hadn't said. The new place had no ghosts. The walls were cream. The cabinets closed quietly. The windows opened without complaint. A modest 2-bedroom, clean floors, working locks, and best of all, my name, and only my name, on the lease. That night, I slept for 7 hours straight. No footsteps in the hallway, no muffled arguments, no sound of borrowed voices in rooms that used to be mine. I bought a new coffee pot the next morning, nothing fancy. Stainless steel, single cup, but it brewed strong and clean. And when I took my first sip, sitting barefoot on the porch, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt earned. There was a tree just beyond the railing, maple not quite full grown. A few stubborn leaves clung to the branches, red and gold curling in at the edges. I liked that tree. It didn't try to be impressive. It just stood where it was planted. The neighbor across the street waved. I waved back. We hadn't exchanged names yet, but she'd brought banana bread the day I moved in and said, just in case no one said welcome yet. It was still warm. No one asked about my past. No one knew what I'd lost. No one asked why a woman in her 60s had moved alone with a folder full of legal papers and a scar running quietly beneath her collarbone. They just said hello and kept walking. I'd forgotten what that kind of kindness felt like. I got a letter from the county clerk later that week. Neutral envelope. Courthouse seal. It confirmed the auction date. Also confirmed that fraud charges were moving forward. Heather hadn't responded to the final notice. Nathan had filed a motion to delay, but it had been denied. They had 14 days left. I didn't read the rest. Just slid the letter into the folder, closed the drawer, and went back to the porch. The air smelled like wet leaves and burnt cinnamon from someone's kitchen. I brought out a blanket and another mug of coffee, pulled my knees to my chest, and let the quiet stretch. It didn't ache. I didn't look back. The phone buzzed, once unknown number. I turned it over and let it go quiet again. Whatever they had to say, I didn't need to hear it. My name was still mine. My credit was being restored. My doctor said the healing from surgery was nearly complete. And this porch. This porch was exactly the right size for one woman, a mug, and a future that no one else got to edit. They showed up 10 minutes early. Robert and I had already laid everything out in the conference room. 2 identical packets, page by page, highlighted lines ready for signatures. The notary sat near the window with a small leather case and a bored expression. This wasn't his first family disaster. Heather wore all black like someone in mourning. Nathan looked thinner, tired in a way that didn't come from just lost sleep. The bags under his eyes had deepened, and his shirt clung to his frame like it used to belong to someone else. No one said good morning. Robert cleared his throat and began reading the terms. This agreement is legally binding, enforceable in court. Total repayment $92,000. Duration 24 months. Monthly minimum $3.83. Payments due on the 1st of every month. Nathan nodded, once his jaw tight. Heather didn't move. Non-payment results in legal action, including wage garnishment, property liens, and credit reporting. Robert continued. You both waive the right to dispute the debt after signing. Do you understand? Yes, Nathan said. Heather hesitated, then echoed yes. The notary stamped the first page, then the next. Each thud of the seal sounded heavier than the last. I didn't speak. When Robert slid the papers across the table, they both picked up pens. Nathan signed quickly. Heather's signature took longer. Her hand trembled slightly. She still wore no ring. When they were done, Robert collected the copies and handed me the originals. I placed them in my folder without looking. Robert turned to them. You'll get automated reminders and monthly statements. If payment is missed, we act immediately. No delays. Nathan gave a stiff nod. Heather glanced at me. You really think this will make things better? No, I said. "But it'll make things clear." She looked like she wanted to argue, but stopped herself. Maybe she was tired of losing. They left without shaking hands. After the door clicked shut, the notary turned to Robert and said, "That one felt cold." Robert gave a dry smile. "That one felt earned." We finished the paperwork and filed the documents with the clerk's office the same day. That night, I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, and opened the folder again. I ran my fingers over the embossed stamp on the final page. There it was. Their names, my name, the numbers that once haunted me, now lined up neatly, like they'd never belonged to chaos. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was structure, boundaries in black ink, and I would enforce them. The first payment came through 2 days before the due date, full amount. No note attached. I transferred the funds into a separate account marked Rebuild. The name felt right. That same week, I bought myself something I'd always hesitated to spend on a sturdy oak writing desk, delivered and assembled by 2 kind men who took off their shoes and asked where I'd like it to face. I placed it by the front window angled toward the porch. That afternoon, I sat down and opened a new notebook. Clean pages. No lines yet. Just space. I thought of all the things I'd had to track over the years, every unpaid bill, every missed call, every hurtful word folded between legal jargon and apology that came too late. Now I could start tracking something else. What was mine? What I chose to build. And this time, no one would rewrite it. I didn't plan to see her. I was just picking up eggs and coffee filters, 2 things I never used to run out of, back when I lived in the house. But now with space of my own, I'd started eating better. Planning less. I moved slower. And I didn't panic when I forgot something. Life had a different rhythm here. The automatic doors slid open, and I grabbed a small basket instead of a cart. It was early, the store half empty. Just a few retirees comparing cereal prices, and a couple of high school kids on their phones by the freezer section. Then I saw her, Heather, at the end of checkout lane, 4, tying a plastic bag like it held something breakable. Her hair was flat, pulled into a ponytail that looked more functional than styled. She wore the store's green apron and a plain white t-shirt beneath. No lipstick. No lashes, just skin pale and tired. Her hands moved quickly, looping handles with practiced motion. She hadn't seen me. I stood still for a moment. The last time I'd seen her, she was arguing with a notary refusing to initial a clause about repayment penalties. Her voice had been sharp, entitled. That version of Heather had worn heels and a designer scarf and said things like, "You don't need the money, you're just being spiteful." This Heather didn't speak at all. She kept her head down. I moved to the self-checkout, scanning my items slowly. She turned slightly when I passed, and for 1 second, our eyes met. Just one. She froze, then gave the faintest nod, not polite, not forced. Just acknowledging. I nodded back. No words, nothing more. It should have felt victorious. It didn't. It felt like gravity. Because whatever she had once been polished, performative, convinced she'd won it, had cracked. And what stood in its place wasn't someone I hated. It was someone I barely recognized. I walked past her and out into the sun. The wind carried the smell of roasted peanuts from the stand across the street. A few people laughed near the bus stop. Life, as always, moved on. At home, I placed the eggs in the fridge, poured coffee into a mug, and sat at the desk by the window. There was still money in the Rebuild account. The second and third payments had arrived on time. Small victories, measured, controlled, nothing explosive, just steady pressure. Heather's job wouldn't make a dent in the debt. Not yet. But I suspected she knew that now. And maybe for the first time in her life, she understood that some debts couldn't be ignored just because they made you uncomfortable. That night, I opened the notebook again. I wrote down 3 simple lines, saw her. She nodded. That was enough. I closed the cover. Outside the porch, light flicked on. A new bulb I'd installed myself. Nothing fancy. Just dependable. It was strange how something so small could make a space feel secure. In the quiet, I sipped coffee, watching the dark settle into soft edges. And in that stillness, I realized some reckonings didn't need an audience. He showed up at dusk, the hour when everything turns soft and uncertain. I saw his shadow first, long sloping across the sidewalk, before his feet reached the porch. He wasn't carrying anything this time. No documents, no bags. Just himself. Hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. I didn't open the door right away. I let him stand there for a beat. Then I pushed the screen open and stepped aside. "Thanks," he said quietly, stepping in. I didn't want to text. Felt like something I should say, face to face. I nodded toward the kitchen. "Coffee's on." He smiled faintly. Some things never change. I poured 2 mugs. We sat at the small table near the window, the one I'd thrifted and refinished myself. He looked around, like he hadn't been in a space that belonged to just me in a long time. "Nice place," he said. "It's mine." That landed heavier than I expected. He nodded, eyes dropping to his cup. "I've been thinking a lot," he started. "About everything. The house. Heather. You." I let him speak. "I think we were so used to you giving we didn't think to ask. You were always there. Holidays, bills, babysitting, even just listening." He looked up at me, his voice unsteady. "You never asked for much, Mom. Not even thanks. So we stopped seeing what it cost you." I kept my eyes on him. "I wasn't going to make this easy." I took the silence as permission, he admitted. "That's on me. And I don't expect a clean slate, but I needed to tell you that you regret it." He paused. "Yes." I stirred my coffee, letting the sound fill the space between us. "You let her take the lead," I said. "You let her forge my name, move into my home, erase me. You were my son, Nathan. And when it counted, you didn't protect me. You didn't even question it." His jaw tightened. "I know. And now you see me because the consequences are real." He didn't argue. I took a breath, quieter now. "Do you remember the summer you broke your leg?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, I was 13. You cried the first night. I sat by your bed until morning. You said you were scared the pain would never stop." He nodded slowly. "Well, I was scared too. Not just that night. For years. About money. About your future. About whether I was doing enough. But I never showed it, because I thought that's what being a mother meant. You hold it all so they don't have to." He looked like he might cry. I didn't. "I don't need a thank you," I said, "but I won't carry silence anymore." He swallowed hard. "What do you need?" "I need the next payment on time. I need boundaries. And I need you to stop looking for forgiveness when what you really need is to grow." He nodded. "Okay." We sat there for a while longer. Not quite family. Not quite strangers. Just 2 people sitting in the cost of everything that hadn't been said for years. When he left, he hugged me. I didn't hug him back. Not yet. But I didn't turn away either. Later, I folded the blanket on the couch, checked the calendar, and crossed another day off the repayment schedule. 7 months down. 17 to go. The porch light flickered, once, then steadied. The garage was the only thing my husband ever built from scratch. Back when we still lived in that first fixer-upper on Bellwood Drive, he spent every weekend of an entire summer digging, measuring, sawing. I used to bring him iced coffee when the heat hit hard, and he'd grin through the sweat like the work didn't bother him. We didn't have much then, but we had each other. And that space was the first thing we'd ever truly owned. Later, when we moved into the bigger house, he rebuilt it from memory, laid the foundation himself, sanded every panel, installed the alarm system twice after it failed the first time. That garage was his signature, practical, careful, sturdy, just like him. After he passed, it became mine by default. And now, in this newer place, smaller and quiet, I had no garage, so I built one. Not with wood or tools, but with numbers. The storage unit wasn't far clean, temperature-controlled, lockdown tight. Not a garage in the classic sense, but enough space to keep the pieces that still mattered. The photo albums, his tool chest, the wedding quilt, and the box of documents I didn't want to risk leaving in a house with walls other people had touched. The keypad was simple 4 digits, 1 lock. Only I knew the code. No spare key. No backup plan. No trust handed out like candy to people who only knew how to chew through it. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. I'd lived long enough with open doors. This time, the boundary was real. I stood there that afternoon after programming the final code and watching the bolt click into place. My breath came easier than it had in months. A text buzzed on my phone. Nathan. Just a short one. Payment sent. No emoji. No follow-up. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked home slowly, coffee in hand, wind in my jacket. The fall air had started to sharpen, curling around the corners of my sleeves. At the front steps, I looked up at the porch light, still steady. Inside, the apartment smelled like fresh laundry and lemon oil. I'd cleaned earlier, and the scent still lingered in the baseboards. I hung up my coat, poured the rest of the coffee into my favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the rim, and sat by the window. The binder sat open on the desk. The repayment chart now had 8 months checked off. Underneath it was a second folder, one labeled simply Trust. Not a metaphor, a real one. A trust fund I'd created quietly with the first 5 payments, not for family, not for legacy, not for repair. For women like me. Women who knew how much it cost to be silent. How much it cost to rebuild from beneath someone else's ambition. I hadn't told anyone about it. I didn't need to. This time, the blueprint was mine. I looked out across the street, where a little girl kicked a soccer ball against the curb, her laughter echoing up into the breeze. Her mother leaned on the railing, smiling gently. No one watching me. No one asking for anything. Just the sound of a life that no longer needed my permission to be quiet. I closed the binder and turned off the desk lamp. Tomorrow, I'd start drafting the workshop syllabus for the local community center. First topic, how to protect what's yours, and maybe, just maybe, how to build the kind of garage no one else gets the code to.